I love the YouTube channel Stuff They Don't Want You to Know. They present conspiracy theories in an entertaining way, and although they have an open mind and will research almost any topic, they usually don't draw wild conclusions or come across as whack jobs. Unfortunately, their most recent video, 5 Reasons Being Rich Can Make You a Bad Person, is not really up to their usual standards. I'm afraid I'm going to have to address it. It's presented as a countdown, so let's go ahead and follow along. Number 5.
There's this belief that having too much money, whatever that is, can make you a bit of a miser, a bit of an Ebenezer Scrooge. And here's what they found. Researchers for several nonprofit agencies found that people with an income of $25,000 or less tended to give around 4.2% of their income to charitable causes. On the other hand, people who were making $150,000 or more tended to give only about 2.7% of their income.
Blind statistics like this can be kind of misleading. A lot of people making $25,000 a year or less are teenagers and retirees who just work part-time jobs to make a little extra pocket money. Now, I don't know if stats exist to show exactly how many people are trying to make a living off of that with no other means of support. But I can say that people who are at or below the minimum wage are disproportionately young. About half of them are ages 16 to 24. Keep in mind, barely anyone actually makes the minimum wage. Most people make at least a little bit more, including those teenagers. That means this $25,000 figure is going to include a lot of people who live at home with their parents. It will also include people who are just starting out in life, who don't have children, mortgages, or car payments. And let's take a look at the income tax rates. Someone making $25,000 a year is going to pay 15% of their income in federal taxes, whereas someone making $150,000 is going to pay 28%. Someone in that high of an income bracket is also much more likely to get hit by capital gains taxes and inheritance taxes. The reality of the situation is that regardless of income level, everyone prioritizes their own needs before they start trying to help other people. A rich or upper middle class family will, before any other expense, live in the best possible neighborhood they can afford with the best possible school district, and make any other quality of life decisions they can to maximize their own benefit from their income level. It is absolutely their right to do so. It's what almost anyone would do under the circumstances. There's also a wide array of assistance programs that would be available to someone trying to make a living off of $25,000. This also lowers the percentage of their income that goes to basic necessities. Now, I have a feeling I know what you might be thinking. There's images in your head of people driving Porsches and buying huge, elaborate mansions. But remember, we're not necessarily talking about trust fund babies here. The study cited people who make $150,000 a year or more. I don't know if you could technically call that rich. That's almost more like upper middle class. This is the zeitgeist of the day. There's a lot of propaganda flying around, and what it does to your brain is it brings to mind the super wealthy and makes you apply those generalizations to people who just make a little bit more money than you do. So, while someone in the noted tax bracket is going to have an increased percentage of their income going to basic necessities, the government takes a much higher percentage of their income in taxes. If less of a percentage of their disposable income was being eaten up by taxes and basic necessities, there's a good chance that a higher percentage of their income would end up going to charity. Now, obviously, I can't prove that, but these statistics come from IRS data from itemized tax returns. And many middle-class and upper-middle-class people don't itemize their tax returns. They wouldn't make enough money back from deductions to justify it, and it would greatly increase their likelihood of getting audited. Remember, the IRS targets the middle class for audits because they know the middle class doesn't have the money to fight them in court. This data is really dubious. I don't think it's worth drawing these kind of sweeping conclusions from. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next one.
Does having more wealth make you a greedier person? Well, according to a study at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, it does make you more likely to shoplift.
I could challenge this definition of greed. But just for the sake of argument, why don't we go ahead and accept it, and let's take a closer look at that study. This study was conducted by a face-to-face interview. So in other words, they got some people together and asked them questions. The only thing this proves is that people with a higher income level are more likely to admit to shoplifting in a face-to-face interview. You can't prove one way or the other if rich people actually shoplift more than those with average and low incomes. Digging around, I found that the sources for crime-related statistical data only break down arrests by sex and age, and not income level. Now, I'm certainly not an expert in this kind of thing, and I'm more than welcome if somebody can suggest where I can find that. Please send it my way. I'd really like to see it. If anybody does so, I'll make an updated video about it. Meanwhile,
that brings us to number 3. Are people with more wealth more likely to cheat?
now this study actually had an experimental element to it, and that gives it a little more credence with me. Let's grant this premise and say that statistically, people with higher income levels are more likely to cheat in some circumstances. And let's come back to this point later. How about the next one?
Number 2, and this is maybe not so much about being a bad person as it is a sad possible fact. A guy at Harvard named Michael Norton went around and asked a bunch of people if they were happy, if they were satisfied. I mean, that's the thing we always hear, right? Money buys happiness.
Really? Who says that? The common saying is that money doesn't buy happiness. This is also based on some face-to-face interviews, and this question is pretty subjective at best. This point is kind of silly, and I don't think it really warrants a serious discussion. Let's move on.
Number 1, what if having more money makes you less compassionate, makes you feel less empathy, makes you care less about other people in the world around you?
Now, this study also had an experimental element, and so I'm also more inclined to think that it might have some merit. So once again, let's grant this premise and say that maybe people with a higher average wealth tend to be less empathetic. What conclusion can we take from this? I assert that we have a word for making generalizations about a group of people and extrapolating from that to make judgments about individuals. That word is bigotry. In general, bigotry is not tolerated in modern society, and rightly so. Now, I granted that maybe high-income people are more likely to be less empathetic and cheat. So let's take a look at some other statistical data and see what kind of bigoted conclusions we could draw from that. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, there were 521,196 arrests for violent crimes in the United States in 2012. 201,116 of them were of African Americans. According to the U.S. Census, African Americans are 13.2% of the general population. Black people are 13.2% of the population, but apparently they commit almost 40% of violent crimes. Black people are violent criminals.
Oh my God!
Well, that's a loaded statement, isn't it? You could pick that apart for days. If someone ran around screaming that from the rooftops, you would rightly call them a racist. That kind of prejudice and bigotry is disgusting. But it's perfectly socially acceptable to do the same thing with rich people. The rich are a minority that is safe to belittle, and safe to blame for social ills based on flimsy evidence. Remember that nebulous study that claimed to show that rich people are more likely to shoplift? Look at what that inspired. Before you saw my rebuttal, did it even occur to you to consider these concepts in a different light? Or did you just think to yourself, yeah, rich people are assholes, fuck them, and go on with your day? If so, you just exhibited a bigoted tendency and used confirmation bias to back up your own prejudices. If you put 5 reasons being rich can make you a bad person in your mental back pocket as a way to justify to yourself and others taxing rich people at higher rates or in creative new ways, you're the kind of bigot who abuses the state to torment people who are different from you. And this is how bigotry works. It's insidiously woven into the fabric of society, masquerading as acceptable conversation. It was the same way with bigotry against racial minorities, and until very recently, it was the same way with bigotry against homosexuals, transgenders, and other people with untraditional sexuality. As much as I like stuff they don't want you to know, I think they ought to stick to conspiracy theories.